Welcome to another episode of Voices in Digital Theology, sponsored by the Global Network for Digital Theology. I'm Catherine Schmidt, Assistant Professor at Malloy College in New York, and with me is my co-host, Jonas Kurlberg. Hi, Jonas.
Hi, Catherine.
He's the Deputy Director for the Center for Digital Theology. You want to introduce our guest today?
Today we had Frederike Van Oorschot with us, and she works for the Protestant Interdisciplinary Research Center, which is based in Heidelberg. She's also a co-director for a new initiative called Theology, which is a research center on digital theology based at Heidelberg University. It's really exciting to have you with us today, and we look forward to the conversations that we're going to have. As usual, our first question is really about your background, and just to hear a bit more about what research you've been doing to date, and really what's your interest in digital theology and your journey towards digital theology.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me and having me here. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Well, I'm a Protestant theologian, just studied theology in Germany, like a lot of other people do. And I did my dissertation project in public theology with the focus on globalization. And that was the first time when I started to think about digital spaces and how they might shape our understanding of theology, where we do theology, how we do theology, all these kind of things. And then I had the second book project called Habilitation, which we have to do here in Germany, on hermeneutical questions on the interpretation of scripture. So this is a second path for me, thinking about the digital. So how do we approach what we think or what we see, how we experience the world we live in? What kind of mediality we are dealing with? So these two parts come together, and then I started thinking about these digital questions, started with the Cursor journal we might speak later about, and then the Theolab, so kind of all come together. Well, and now as we have the COVID crisis here, and we have a lot of church life going on online, and I'm working for church research institutes, this is kind of a big deal thinking about ecclesiology, anthropology, all these related questions on, well, what is church life like? How does it change? What can we experience online? What do we want to do? The Eucharist, all these questions. So this is kind of my way into digital theology. Feels like it's still at the very beginning of understanding what's going on and what can one reflect on these topics. But yeah, it's a great field to work on, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity to come together at the Global Network now and discuss these issues.
Yeah, so we'll ask you a little bit about the public theology question, because I think you're one kind of a unique perspective in that, in the people that we've interviewed, and that you've done, work in that. But your affiliation with Cursor and with Theolab, we just wanted to hear a little bit about that, because one of the great things about our network is that it's global, and so we want to give people some idea about what's going on kind of in your world.
Okay, so I might start with Cursor because this is the project I'm longer involved. Cursor is an online open access journal, a theological online open access journal, and we're actually evolving kind of a workspace in this, in addition to the journal work. It's not specific on digital theology, but it's on all current issues. What we want to do is trying to use digital spaces and digital tools online to create a space for an open theological discussion. So trying to explore theological topics in the intersection of academia, church discussions, and online discussions.
Was there, sorry to interrupt you, was there a sense that there wasn't too much of that? I mean, is this filling a need or filling a gap that you all saw when Cursor was founded?
Well, in the German-speaking world, we have a lot of discussions, theological discussions in churches. We have a lot of theological discussions in academia, but not there many intersections of the two parts. And then we have a quite lively theological discussions going online, so kind of podcasts and blogging and all these kind of things, but they aren't related to one of these fields either. So the thing was thinking about a space where these kind of three worlds could come together, and and then kind of trying to evolving a space where one can explore, think loudly about things, not being, it's not like publication in the academic world. So you have to be ready, and then you have the peer review thing. Just publishing something for discussion, it's more open space. It was something we saw a need for, and which I think we could fill in a way.
So I think I interrupted you and you were going to tell us about Theolab. So let me.
Well, I just want to add to Cursor that we started with the journal. So we had twice, two issues a year on different topics. And what we saw, especially in the last year, that there's a need for kind of workspaces online where you can publish a text and then comment on that and just discuss it. Yeah, as I said, in a very explorative, it's called Journal for Explorative Theology. So kind of exploring the Explorer teams, it's called. And then we had the AAR papers from the session from 2019 published there, so one can discuss it, comment on that, share them online, all these kind of different things. So this is going, well, I think Cursor is about 5 years old now. The project starts getting bigger and bigger. But it's quite a new initiative based on the Faculty of Theology in Heidelberg. It's 4 colleagues, 3 theologians, and 1 computer scientist working together. We have, or most of us have a DH background, so coming from digital theology, digital humanities, thinking about how the tools and methods and insights of DH could influence theological work.
Yeah.
So it's more technique-based question, and I'm the hermeneutic woman there. So I'm thinking about how our theological, our understanding of theology and our topics change when we use different tools. There's a large debate on these kind of questions, on theory of DH coming up in years. And as we theologians are pretty keen on our scripture, I mean, even as a medium scripture, reading texts, understanding ourselves as parts of a hermeneutical process between reading and understanding discussion. So I think this changes quite a lot if you use digital tools for kind of data mining, whatever you want to do. So that's my part. The first year, we had our grand opening conference last weekend, so it's quite a fresh thing. And I'm pretty looking forward where it leads us to.
Yeah. How I don't know if you can say such a thing, but obviously for us whose German is limited to high school, we're excluded for some of these conversations that's going on in Germany. But it seems to be quite a vibrant community now of scholars that are wanting to talk about digital theology. Including yourselves and people at Cursor and so forth. Do you think that the conversation that's going on in the German-speaking world are slightly different from our side, or are they kind of very much on a similar kind of things?
Well, I mean, some years ago we looked at Durham and we're like, whoa, what's going on there? And we want to have like kind of conversations like this, and like so I think it's kind of a time thing, and it's not that all the theological world in Germany is talking about digital theology. It's just few of us. Yeah. A lot of them based in Heidelberg, a lot of them based in Tübingen. So there are some spots in Germany where it starts. In Bochum, there are some. So there are several things going on, and we have a very lucky situation that the churches in Germany, especially the Protestant church in Germany, is very interested in these questions of digitization. And they allow funding for projects, not large ones, but for theologians, so it works out. So our Cursor project, for example, is partly based on that. So we have very good opportunities to communicate, we have a new network on theology and digitization based on the Protestant churches in Germany. So there's quite a lot of things going on. And the COVID situation did kind of the last kick for all that. So there are a lot of church people interested in that.
Is that across traditions, or is that really specific to? Everyone knows I'm Catholic. I just want to know what the Catholic Church is doing in relationship to some of this. Are they as keen to explore these questions, or is it mostly from the Protestant side of things?
At the moment, I would say there are more Protestants involved in these discussions, but there's also interest in that on the Catholic side. But the questions are slightly different. So how one understands Eucharist and online Eucharist. So this is kind of a really hard, tough question if you're a Catholic. It's a completely other question, even depending on the question of how you be ordained, who's celebrating a mass, how you can, all these kind of questions related to that. So what I see at the moment is that the debates are kind of separated. The debates on the online worshiping and online Eucharist. So we have a Catholic and Protestant debate, slightly interfering.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think one of the things that COVID has done specifically is to, unfortunately, even further highlight some confessional differences, especially when it comes to sacramentality and ecclesiology and things like that. So I love what you said about, well, you're the hermeneutic woman. So I'm just wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about, specifically the sort of mode of theology and how it relates to your work on public theology. So how does the digital context kind of change, or how does it play into public theology?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very interesting and very broad questions. I'm just trying to get some starting point. Well, as far as I can see, there are two different modes on relating on digitality, digital change in theology. The one is that you keep it as a subject. So you think about digitalization. So what does it mean? How does our world change? Or what does it mean for service, whatever? And the other one is taking serious that the digital changes mean kind of cultural changes in our way approaching the world. And that means that you even have to think about your own theological thinking as part of this digital world. So you have to think how to digitally think about, or how to think theologically in a digital world, and not how to think about digitalization as if it is something other you're not a part of. And what I pretty much like about this question is that it's very similar to the questions on public theology in the very beginning. These debates on public theology were like, we're here, we're theology, there's public, let's think about public. And what I tried to focus on in my work on public theology is that isn't true. So every theological thinking, if it wants to be public theology, is kind of publicly thinking or thinking together, involving in public. So it's kind of a process, an ongoing process. And I think it's very much the same with the digital thing. So if you want to think about digital theology, you don't have to, well, you have to think about what does different tools mean for whatever, but you also have to think about what does these tools do to me and to my work, to my understanding of the world. So what I mean with the hermeneutical questions on that.
Are we at a point now, I mean, maybe Jonas could speak to this a little bit, because I think this is something that's come up a lot in our conversations, but are we at a point now, because we're so enmeshed in digital culture, where in a sense doing theology is always doing digital theology? So, you think about what it would be like to be a PhD student right now, or be a master's student in theology, and their theological training is an incredibly digital enterprise. So is that too much to say, you think, that all theology is sort of digital in some way?
Well, I would strengthen what I said before, that there are two modes of thinking about it. So in a way it's true, because we as theologians are part of a pretty much digitized world. So our theology can't be no other than a digital theology. And on the other hand, there are a lot of things we can think about which are not affected by the digital in that way. So I think if you want to, you can always find some kind of connection between nearly every subject you think about and the digital, but I think there's no sense in doing that. But in the first way I described, I would say there's this kind of a true statement. So we we have to think about that. And what we see at the moment at the universities in Germany, I mean, we do everything in a digital way. We are doing an interview digitally mediated. We're doing digital conferences, we do digital teaching, and all the kind of things. And so we can't say our theology is not digital at the moment. And I think what we have to explore is how does these kind of media change our way of doing theology, doing our theological teaching, affects our research, all these kind of things.
So are they, what's your thinking on that then? Yeah, actually, what changes? Or how should we think about it?
Well, I think it pretty much depends on which part you're referring to. I mean, at the moment, it's kind of, we can't really change how it's going. So we try to do the best out of it. But for teaching, I would say it's a kind of an opportunity in a way to try to figure out what ways of digital teaching we want to use and digital research we want to use and which we want to keep. And on the other hand, we see what we miss and what we can't do at the moment. So I hope that we come up in the end of all that with a kind of a mixture between different forms. So this is the first thing. But if we come to think about these modes of like doing theology in a digital world, in a way, I would say I can't really imagine how we end up like that. I mean, we get used to these kind of digital communication in so different ways at the moment because we have to, and I would say that will change our social behavior, our understanding of getting connected, being in relation, of reality, of being together, of bodily experiences, all these questions so much in a way that we can't really cover at the moment. What I want to do from next year on is with a group of people thinking about theological anthropology in the way of digitalization, because I think our understanding, our self-understanding and our understanding of social, well, being together, social life in a way, changes so much at the moment that we could just have to think about that further.
Okay. So you've done a little bit of writing on how digitality changes the kind of the public sphere and the implications for that for public theology in particular. What are your arguments there around that?
Well, I would say that what I said is that the public changes. So we can't think about public theology without thinking about digital public, I would say. So that was one of the first points. And then in a way, the understanding of digital publics changes our understanding of publicness in a way that it kind of gets absurd. So everything is kind of public and nothing is kind of public in the old way we understood the term in public theology. So this is a quite interesting point because we have to think about newly what we mean by public theology. And then I tried to would love to make the case for these intersection of doing theology publicly, especially for the digital space, because as we see how the public sphere changed by digital spaces, we can't really separate between public and private in a lot of ways. So it gets more and more important to find ways to do theology publicly. And I would say online, it's a great place to do theology in public spaces with the people you want to address or you want to talk to. So what I would love to try is to see how far we can get by doing public theology in this way, online or in the digital world. Instead of thinking about public theology, trying to define things or writing something about whatever and then hand it out and then see what people do with it. Because I think that's not how digital publics work. I mean, it always belongs to what you're talking about, but if you like refer to it like social media or something, or how news works now. This is not the structure we reflect on when we think about public theology, like writing a text, handing it out, publishing it, and then it gets discussed. That's not how it works. So in a way, we have to have more like a procedural, can you say it in English? Like thinking theology as a process of getting public, being public, then of theology at the one hand, public at the other hand, trying to combine it like the old models did. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess what okay, so maybe a different way of putting it, what should a public theologian think about, given that the space that they're speaking into is different?
I would say there is no general answer. It depends on what you want to address and where you're standing, what your interests are, and what your focus is. So I'm not a friend of general definitions in that way, because I would say public theology is something deeply contextual. So what I have to address in my context, if I want to be a public theologian, might be something completely different than Catherine has to address in her context. So I just can speak for myself. What I would say in my field at the intersection of church and academia would be the questions of anthropology I mentioned earlier, the questions of of church life, so better now. And then the questions of hermeneutics. I mean, that's my special interest, so I always see hermeneutics coming up everywhere, but the way we perceive the world and what's going on, I think has to be reflected theologically in a more sensitive way as it is done before.
One of the critiques I think that I've heard quite a bit about any conception of a kind of public space in the digital has to do with a kind of siloing, or how do we say this, kind of the echo chamber, you know, people finding places that are kind of like-minded people. So I'm just wondering how you think about that. Is it the case that, you know, perhaps public in sort of public theology was never really as public as we thought, but do you have any response to that critique about, you know, digital spaces being very siloed or isolated, you know, from other voices?
Well, I think that's always depend on the platform you use, and so you have to think very carefully on that. But I think it's, in a way, it's true, but I think it's not something very new, because if we used to publish our church, whatever, or theological thoughts in one special paper or whatever, there has been always a community reading that, and it was kind of, it's not a closed community, and everyone could read it, but not everyone did. So I would say it's not something new, but it's something more, it gets more important trying to spread the message, spread what you want to say on different platforms, in different ways, like doing, using different medial forms, like having a podcast or making a video or whatever. So trying to overcome this kind of echo chamber effect. But I think it would be, well, I think it's not possible just to come over that, but I think it wasn't before. So it's has been the task for church for all the time, and theology too, trying to reach different people. And it's difficult today, but it has been difficult always. So it's kind of, it's not a new question in this respect.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I'm inclined to agree with you about that, and I think there's a lot more continuity with digital culture in moments like that. But I'm wondering, I'm just thinking a lot about Cursor. You know, I'm so intrigued by this sort of open model of research and scholarship, and I'm wondering if you see any sort of limitations to it, or, you know, is there a sense in which it's, does it offer something different, you know? Is it more public in a way, do you think, because of the digital than a sort of traditional journal?
Well, I would say it addresses different publics. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's more public than whatever journal you have in mind. But it addresses different publics. And what we try to do is building up communities in the different publics. So like having a church congregation thinking about the text and then commenting on that online, and then having like a seminar or some people at a workshop coming together, commenting on the same text. So it's kind of, well, one could say it's kind of artificial bringing them together, but that's what we try to do, to use the digital tools, bringing people together, thinking about the same text at the moment mostly, who would have never met in other places. So it's a lot of work. It's not like you publish something and have the platform and then everyone is on there discussing. So everyone knows that who's doing something online. But it's about community building. And I think that's something, in a way, we are good at with theologians. So trying to build up networks, bringing them together, trying to explore who else is around. So this is something what we want to do. I wouldn't say that this is, I mean, the last platform or the best or the most public or whatever, but it's kind of a piece of the puzzle, bringing things together. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, that kind of leads on to the question that we tend to end these episodes with, and that is really thinking about what's the relationship between digital theology and academic theology, and what does, again, it's really the question of what does digital theology constitute a kind of a new turn for theology?
Well, I saw it coming, but still not sure what to answer, because I would say, well, in a way, it offers new topics and things to think about, but that's not the most interesting. For me, it's not. This is not the most interesting about it. So we have new data, we have new experts around, we have new fields relating to, and all these kind of things. But what I would say is that it changes our overall theological thinking, because it raises the awareness for this digital turn as a cultural turn in the way we live in. And as far as I see myself as a systematic theologian, I can't ignore that. I mean, if the world around changes, I can't just go on like I did before. So I would say this, in a way, really affects all my theological thinking, because it changes the circumstances I'm working and I'm living and I'm thinking in, and I'm approaching the world. I mean, I just said it earlier. But it's not as an obvious turning point or something, but it might be, looking back 500 years later or something, that you would say they started to think about the digital and then theology changed. If we really want to use this kind of change and use the tools we have and face what we're seeing there, I think there's the possibility for really changing subjects. And I think it depends on the discipline you're working on. So maybe for me as a systematic theologian, focusing on public theology changes much more than it does for an Old Testament scholar. But they also have the opportunity to work with new tools to model a biblical understanding in a way they couldn't before. So, well, I think it's just interesting to see, and trying to make your part, contribute what you think it's interesting in that, and then we'll see 100 years later or whenever whether it really changed something or not.
Well, Frederike, thank you so much for being with us today. We're absolutely going to link to Cursor so that we can get more people in the conversation. I think it's just such it's an inspiring space to kind of enter into, because it is kind of doing theology differently in some ways. And I think that's, you're sort of ahead of your time, I think, you guys over there. So
well, thanks.
Yeah, so we're really excited about that. But thanks again for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.